started with the town hall proper. So Mike, great to have you, and also I see Mastro joining us as well. Glad to have you back, and we can kind of get underway here. So my plan for today was to just basically have like some kind of forward-looking conversations about what we're working on and what we hope to be working on in the coming year or so. But does any important updates before I do that? Any like important updates from the past week? I think Eureka John, you probably have one. Anybody else?
Okay,
I'll go ahead. Yeah, there you
okay.
go.
All right. Sorry. Just clearing my mouth out of chips and queso. So my update is we launched the DiGiorno mini series, episode 1 today, just like about an hour ago. I'm the AV lead for Crypto Sapiens podcast with Humpty Calderon as the host. And they've been doing mini series, and previous to this, it was decentralized science. And before that, it was decentralized ID. And I thought, with my involvement in JournoDAO, why not do a mini series on decentralized journalism? And so you guys have been an amazing help in covering some really important topics in Web3 and journalism. First of all, episode 1, like, what is it? How is Web3 even relevant to journalism? What is journalism? And then episode 2, we're going and looking at some of the tooling and the difference between a platform and a protocol. And then episode 3 covers a lot of topics more in depth, like censorship, and how Web3 can help alleviate some of the censorship issues going on in journalism. And then the 4th episode deals with public goods. Is journalism a public good? And you'd hope so, and how can Web3 facilitate that? And it just launched today, so go check it out. It's on cryptosapiens.xyz, and it's all over all of our Twitters at this moment right now.
Yeah, and I've listened to the first half hour. I know some of us have declared plans to never listen, which I understand completely. And as much as you don't want to hear your own voices, I will compensate by my desire to hear my own voice as much as possible. So I think we can even out. And I listened to the first half hour, and it sounds good. So far, it sounds really great. Eureka John did a great job of cleaning us up, making us sound a little smarter than we are. So I think it would be actually good for your self-esteem, Keith, everyone else.
Yeah, y'all clean up nicely.
For sure.
I don't think you realize how micro I can get my analysis of what should have been said or what was said. It's like, it's ridiculous. Just got to opt out entirely.
Well, going back and listening for a second time, I really understood things on a deeper level. Whenever you're there talking and you're in the heat of the moment, trying to think of questions and answer questions and back and forth, you don't really realize what you're saying a lot of times. And so it took that second listen to really be like, wow, like Keith's like really explained that well. So let me cut out some of the parts where you're thinking about what you're going to say and then put it all together, and it sounds really good.
Okay, good. Thank you for that.
You've been fixed in post.
Yeah. Post will fix it. I don't know how many times I've heard that.
I already sent it to Mama Street, so she knows that my friends are smart. So she's excited to listen.
She'll be so proud of you.
Oh, cute. She won't understand anything we're saying, but it's okay.
Cool. Anything else from the past week? Updates, whatnot? So my thought was for this is I would just kind of use this as an opportunity to have the meeting we were trying to have earlier, but couldn't coordinate, and I will just throw it open to everyone. And then we can also, Keith, if we get through this discussion, it kind of leads right into talking more about the Journo token. And so we can kind of go from there. I guess, well, here, I'll go ahead and share this. So this is in our Notion, and this is just like a really like me basically just trying to capture some of the things that we've been talking about over the last several months, and capturing them as kind of problem solution statements, and then trying to basically use that as a framework to build outward. So captured all of these, about a half dozen problems that are common to journalism as an ecosystem today, and capturing them, and then what are the potentially Web3 based solutions to experiment with to address these problems. And then so so I have this kind of like basic idea in my head that is not really structured or mapped out in any way, and we've kind of been talking about it, of bringing all these solutions together, and to kind of a master protocol that I just kind of labeled news protocol, which if this ever got built, I would hope we wouldn't call it that, because I would think that most people who aren't into Web3 would run away screaming from something called news protocol if they've heard of anything else called protocol. And it's just kind of an overused, it's not sexy enough. Okay, it's got to be sexy for the clicks and for the headlines, folks. So anyway, that throat clearing out of the way, I'll just kind of go through this. So basically, thinking of news protocol, working title as a conceptual Web3 ecosystem that attempts to use interlocking blockchain-based tools to address a series of problems facing journalists and the communities they cover. It could take the form of a purpose-built blockchain or parachain, or it could be implemented using existing blockchains with data storage capability, such as Ceramic or Arweave, or a combination of Web3 components paired with distributed non-blockchain systems like IPFS. So, either, I mean, if it makes the most sense to build the thing literally from like a layer one up, and that's like the only way that we can achieve what we want to, maybe that's something we look into. If we can do it with existing tools like what Mike is working on, and Mirror, Arweave, like whatever, like I don't care, like whatever works best and is going to make the most sense of meeting the goals is fine with me. So this is, and this is all just a rough draft, but like kind of putting together like a unified stack of tools that help solve these problems. And by the way, before I like dive into these problems, like Crystal and I have been looking into writing different grants to kind of start the ball rolling on some of these things. And like I'm personally, and Crystal, jump in if you want, I'm like personally approaching this as like I'm looking for grants that would empower us to kind of to fund some of this research, to dig deeper into some of these problems, because I don't know that we're at the point of building much yet, unless it's like to build something kind of simple to test these things. Like the one thing that is built most of the way is the Journo token, obviously, so things that could maybe add on to or augment that, or otherwise just kind of looking for ways to fund research at this point. I've already said like a whole lot without even getting into this list. So, like, anyone want to jump in with any like questions or comments?
I think the grant that we're closest to hopefully getting is the Future Quest one, and I think that will help get a chunk of this research done, and then begin to build a prototype too on a smaller like niche topic with climate crisis. So really kind of fleshing out the structure through one narrow lens with a little bit of funding.
And to Eric's point, and to Crystal's point right there about using existing tools rather than necessarily having to invent stuff, if there's tools out there that already address some of these needs. I just learned about HATS protocol. I'm not sure if maybe it was one of you who shared it to me, but someone in PubDAO connected with them, and we're going to be working with them and maybe figuring out some kind of some kind of smart contracts to deploy a publication team, because what HATS protocol is, and it's something that I've been kind of dreaming about for a while, it's tokenized roles. So like in my mind, maybe they think about it differently, but in my mind, that's like you can have a tokenized treasurer role, and then a community can vote on where to send, what wallet to send that role to, if we wanted to like elect a different treasurer. And so like in principle, you can kind of think about any role being tokenized. And I think it's still really early stage. It's some developers from Raid Guild, I believe. And so this could be something that if we wanted a newsroom protocol, this could be something to explore if we want like a lead editor role, something like that, whatever it is. I don't have editorial experience, so I don't know what that vehicle of roles would look like, but it's something that could be explored. Well, I shared a link in the little chat here too.
I came across that months ago. So it's like hats, as in like wearing different hats. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm meaning to try it out, but you need XDAI. I think it's on Gnosis chain. So I've just been trying to go through that bridge process. So not without its friction.
Yeah, I think I stumbled across that through some metacartel people. So let me, and by the way, like another like ancillary to all of this is something that is could be on the bounty list once we have like a bounty bounties up and running. It is to, I think, compile like kind of a master directory of all these different protocols and tools, and kind of I think we got to have. It's funny, like discoverability is something Web3 is so bad at. So like just having like the master list of all the different Lego pieces is particularly with respect for what is useful for media. I haven't found that, so I think we might just have to put it together. So I'll just kind of run through the problems that, and this is definitely not an exhaustive list, but these are the ones that we keep discussing. Just kind of run through these, and then we can discuss or move into the Journo token if we want. So the first problem, which I think is kind of this is like the animating thing for me, particularly today, like lately, because I'm being pushed by this in my personal life, thanks to inflation and some other things. But journalism has become a commodity produced quickly with a focus on quantity to drive clicks and advertising revenue. So, I mean, it's all about, as many clicks means as many stories as possible, particularly in a 24-hour news cycle where each story has like a really limited lifespan. You basically just have to write a lot, and you have to write it fast, and you have to rewrite the headline a million times to get it into the Google News box and or to get it shared on social. And all of this comes at the cost of quality, creativity, curiosity, depth, and enterprising reporting that could better serve the audience and the community. And this is like been the main struggle of my life for like at least a decade, and all the newsrooms that I work in acknowledge it. And there's if you're in a good newsroom, they will find ways for you to do more in-depth stuff, and like that's really encouraged. So like I wouldn't want anyone to take a cynical view of like they really don't care about anything but clicks. Like any place with any integrity, and most reporters who care about anything like do care about integrity and doing a good job in reporting the news. You do try to make allowances, and I have editors that try to carve out time for me to do longer stuff, but the pressure is always there, and there are newsrooms where they don't try to carve out time for that. But anyway, so proposed solution for that: sustainable revenue sources disconnected from market incentives. Something I've described before is, basically, we've seen this move away from advertising into more of a subscriber, communicating an audience and cultivating a community and an audience that you can then tap into as a subscriber base to support yourself without advertising. That's kind of what Substack is about. Of course, the problem with Substack is that it's centralized. So what we're kind of proposing is a Substack without Substack. So a subscription model using some of these tools like NFTs, tools that Unlock Protocol provides. The central point being something that does not rely on centralized servers, either for storage of content or for subscriber data. So, this is where the exciting, aspect of portability from Web3 comes in. I put down some advantages here. Advantages: subscriber revenue reduces corrosive effects of market incentives. Content subscriber data are portable, and composability allows for the development of additions, features, and functionality. Challenges that we're familiar with, and everyone's familiar with if you spend more than a day in Web3, is the UX is difficult to learn. It's difficult for me, and I've been playing with this stuff for years. It's pretty much completely unapproachable for somebody with no knowledge of Web3 at all. Just talking about like dealing with MetaMask and that kind of thing. And then lack of discoverability is also an issue here. Hey, Miles. Miles, you all right, Miles?
What an entrance.
It's good to, yeah, that was an entrance. It's good to hear you. Even
I thought I was muted. Sorry. Yeah. I'm still sick. Now I'm going to move.
Yeah, you're totally okay. I'm glad to hear you. I'm glad you got through that, and you've got a voice there. So chime in when you're able. Any comments on that one, on problem number one?
I guess where my mind goes on that, the only thing that's not necessarily like articulated there is like the subscriber thing is like one way this could happen, but to me, like the more like fundamental thing that's happening is like actually creating a market for that, for like good journalism, where like connecting the people who value good journalism with the people who are providing it, rather than like subsidizing it through this like esoteric like value transfer and extraction of advertising. It's like I don't know, I don't have a succinct way to put it, but just like making the economics make sense without this like unnecessary parasite that is like advertising or even really like federal funding or anything. Like I think it's when I saw disconnected from market incentives, like I understood what you meant, but then it's like, well, I kind of want the market incentives to just like to work so that, you know, it's the smart financial thing to do to like do good do good journalism, rather than right now the smart financial thing is to, like you said, just like crank out copy. Yeah.
Or if we take out the word market, and it's just corrupting incentives.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like we touched on this in that DM, that giant DM thread we threw out while Eric was at Home Depot on Sunday. Like instead of the subscriber model that we're kind of used to with Substack, where you subscribe to an individual journalist, why not subscribe to like a community through an NFT and then go in and choose the journalist content from that community that you want to come into your own feed? So we're kind of like building both the delivery mechanism and also the subscription model at the same time. Does that make sense? Like you could almost make the database of information people are accessing a public good, but then have people pay for an app that delivers like Apple News style to their phone. And then the user goes in and pays for the subscription through an NFT and says, all right, I want information from this town, this town, this town, this journalist, this outlet, whatever. Does that make sense? It makes sense like up here, but I don't know if it comes out.
So is it like the actual reporting, the information is a public good that's on like some base layer, and then it's like the apps are like doing curation on above it? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and then the user gets to like narrow down the curation through the NFT subscriptions they use. Like it's kind of like the same type of model that I would use for the academic project that I'm working on. You've got this database of free information, but then the user pays for it to come to them a certain way. And in our context, that would be through an NFT subscription. And then they choose what they want to engage with.
Mhm. Yeah, that to me, that's like a detailed or like a specific example of kind of like what I'm talking about. Because in that example, like the value would flow to like the person doing the like curation and like providing the experience, because they're like doing the work and everything. And so I mean, all I can really think of is like subscription, like all the things that all the use cases coming to mind are subsumed in like the subscription label. But I just think if we kind of articulate the value transfer more foundationally, it might open up some other ideas about like how, how supporters can, support journalism and support the people that are doing good work, and might not always take the form of a subscription, if that makes sense, though I don't have any like counter examples right now.
Mike, I think you've got some. Jump in.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask about connecting quality journalism to an audience that values it. When I'm in the journalism world, when I'm looking for information, there are two different kinds of products that appeal to me. One is the sort of virtuosic storytelling that tends to be called good journalism. It's what we think of when we think about good journalism. And the other is just the information that's true, or the information that's the most useful. And that can come in a hacked together 4chan crazy board in any format. I don't care, as long as it's good. And when thinking about connecting quality journalism with an audience that values it, I think each of those might have completely different audiences and use cases and platforms that are fit for that. Because if we're looking for, what we tend to think of when we think of good journalism, that does require a skilled author, a creative, curious, prolific, talented, person to provide that and write that. And it's a serious intellectual labor. But if we're just looking to scrape together the basic details to stay ahead of the curve, it might look completely different. It might be provided in a completely different way, and probably for free. Probably there won't be paywalls or subscription models in front of that. People will just be shouting it from the rooftops or from their TikTok accounts or from wherever. And I just wanted to mention that distinction and see if it rings for anybody, or how we might talk about that.
I mean, it's like the difference between Twitter, not to use a loaded example right now, but like Twitter is like a source for that kind of information. Like I cover a lot of science, and there's a lot of scientists that they just will post like some of their latest publications and their latest findings. Like that's how they collaborate and communicate with other scientists and with media, is through science Twitter or whatever. And so that's definitely a source I use like every day, is to just follow certain scientists, and that's where they post. Here's what I'm working on. Here's the basic data. Here's the observations. And yeah, it's instantaneous. It's free. It's from the primary source. So I like that's what I think of when you talk about that, versus like, yeah, some like 10,000 word feature in the New Yorker, or some documentary on Netflix that took a couple of years to produce, being the other end of that, the virtuosic stuff. Is that about right?
Yeah, totally. So just the question, which market is the main one? Whose problem are we trying to solve? Seems relevant.
I mean, I guess what I think is particularly like in terms of like dealing with like local journalism, if that's like the market we're talking about, I think it's the more granular, just the facts, like, because it's hard to even access a lot of that stuff in small places. And then yeah, it's interesting because I think there's a market for both, but like in terms of local journalism, like that seems like the more urgent need, and probably more what I have in mind when like going through these problems, although there's space for the like longer form stuff as well. Like it's like it's not necessary. I don't feel like it's necessarily either or. But yeah, maybe they're cordoned off to opposite sides of the same bucket. They're in the same bucket, yeah, but maybe they are separated a little bit.
And there's a temporal nature to that problem, because you could imagine like local news desert now, like a lot of the stuff that a journalist would do there that's most useful to that community might be done through just like sensors and like automated things, like, you know, to actually provide the information, but those things don't exist now. And so it's actually like a huge asset to the to the community to go and since they're human, then, you know, it's kind of gets blended in with like the information collection also gets blended in with like asking this person and like verifying this and like doing those sort of like journalism type behaviors. So I think it might be a little blurry right now, but I think you're right that like the end state is probably, you know, pretty separate. And in some situations and contexts, it already is like very, very separate. So it's kind of like we got to bootstrap some, like journalists are going to have been and are going to need to like do some raw like data just gathering as part of their task.
Well, I think that could also be addressed on the tools level, like the tools that we use to filter the information. So you've got the Journo token, and that could represent long form content that's supported by community and by, you know, validation. And then you've got some journalists that just want to produce the data that we need, and that could be delivered like RSS feed or something. And then that can also be associated by their ENS address. So if a journalist has an ENS and they've identified that they want to produce, you know, data type journalists like Twitter, then they come into a feed a certain way. And then the user gets to decide what they want to consume. Like, is the app or the delivery method that they choose, maybe it's 3/4 RSS feeds from a handful of journalists, and then it's 1/4 long form content, and that's filtered through the Journo token.
Well, you said something there that like maybe journalism is like what the community decides it is, and as far as like what they support, kind of like, I don't know, art is kind of subjective. Maybe this is like, well, our community really needs this, and so this person is doing that, and that's like journalism for us. And so like, you know, that's what we're gonna reward that person with like some sort of task specific or like credentials or validation or something like that. Which I think is pretty interesting. Like, it may not be up to us like as designers or of this protocol to really make that distinction. Maybe build in ways for the community to kind of make that call. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the user kind of ends up making the call. Like, if we provide the mechanism to deliver various types of content, then the user can decide what it is they want to consume, what they want to pay for, and how they consume it. And then the funds are redistributed back to the journalists through the NFT subscription through, you know, smart contracts.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think, so like a theme I'm hearing is, you know, it's basically bringing the community and the audience like into the editorial process a little bit by way not meaning you have community editing going on, but just by way of, you know, part of the editorial process is choosing what you're going to cover, right? And so you're talking about like ways to, I think, you know, increase community ownership and like the value in a news outlet by bringing the community into the actual process of choosing what's going to be covered. Is that right?
A little bit. I think that flows from it. I guess I'm focused on this kind of like semantic distinction of like what is journalism, and I think I could see the situation where like one community might view like one activity as like science of just like running this experiment or going out and doing this like data collection or something, but then another community might view that as like journalism, and that it's like this collected information that is like packaged up and then like delivered. And you know, I think even like we've discussed that kind of blurriness on like our DSI calls and stuff, and so it just strikes me that you know, if we're going to use some sort of global definition of journalism and what it is, then maybe that'll make things harder for us. Whereas like if we understand it as like derived from the community, as far as like labeling this just via their, you know, like the Journo token, for example, like if everyone just decides to give Journo token to this reporter or this person for doing something, and you know, this group of us just looking at the situation, we're like, that I don't think that's journalism or whatever. It's like, is that up to us to decide?
I feel like I can give a pretty universal definition of journalism that I find most people can get on board with. And it's 4 words. What's really going on? Like, I kind of think everyone, like, if like that is the goal. The goal is to provide information, analysis, storytelling, data that helps us understand what's really going on.
But isn't that the same as science? Isn't science?
Yep. It
And
is.
so, yeah.
But yeah, it is.
So
I
I just
mean,
within those shades of like, it's like a continuum, right? And it's like, I don't know. This would help if I had like had some like great examples on hand. I'll try and like filter out.
I mean, the difference between science and journalism is that science deals pretty much exclusively, most of the time, in stuff that's falsifiable and objective. Mostly, there's some fuzziness in social sciences and stuff, but like, whereas journalism deals in that plus everything else, you know. So it's like okay, yeah, we can write about science, but there's all this other stuff of this subjective reality that we all live in on this, with these resources and this planet and this society that we all share, where we got to kind of figure out what's really going on. And you know, like the best way that we've kind of come up with to do that is to gather as many perspectives as possible and as much data as possible, and you know, then you just do your best with what you got. And it's not perfect, and it never will be, but like, if the understanding is that like that is the North Star and that is the goal, is to tell people what's really going on to the best of our understanding. I don't know, it's just like something that like everyone can grasp.
Yeah. I mean, and not being a journalist myself, I think I agree there. And like, what's really going on, and then maybe another facet that's in my understanding of journalism is reporting it to the public. Like, to me, like the public aspect of it seems important. Like if you're just reporting information to like private sources, then you're like a scout. You're like some kind of like reconnaissance agent or a spy or something.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, okay. Add a couple more words. Telling people what's really going on.
And without opinion. I think that's the other part. too.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, right. So like, I mean, the word there that I always use is fairness. Because you can't like, you open a can of worms if you try to use the word objective. Like objectivity is something to aspire to, in my mind. And like, another way to put it is just, to try to be fair. And yeah, there's no there's no one way to define what fair is, but it's one of those words where it's like we think we know it when we see it. Like we all think we have an idea of it. And like the concept that we are all raised with of what fairness means is pretty universal. So it's like it is this like touchstone that you can come back to. It's a little bit easier for people to grasp than objectivity. Which gets a little bit more technical than maybe it needs to be. But anyway, I don't know. We kind of got sorry, I get derailed with like some of these.
no, I
Like,
think I took us down that path, but I'm glad that it yielded some good speechifying on Eric's part about what journalism is. But
it's well, I get worked up because there's like the straw man like journalist like that people attack all the time. Like there's no such thing as objectivity, and like well, like it is something that people have actually thought about. But like yeah, we could maybe use a better term.
well, the gentleman from Portland is satisfied. We can move on.
Say this could be like a 6-hour town hall, so we got 6 points.
I started okay, so I started to put some notes on that one, but then I think I lost a few, and I definitely I kind of lost the point that I think Crystal was trying to make. Like, is there? Well, I guess you can go back into this doc at any point if you want and add it, Crystal.
Yeah, and I can take that conversation we had in Discord and work it in just as a side note too.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll just move down to the problem number 2. Again, keeps coming up. Discoverability of news content relies primarily on opaque extractive algorithms. Now we're talking about Web 2 here now. Opaque extractive algorithms controlled by Google, Facebook, and Twitter. Critical portals like Google News score factors like reputation, virality, and engagement to inform proprietary algorithms that determine where we get our news without any understanding of how those algos work, confusing and perverting journalists' incentives by forcing them to play the SEO game. So basically what I'm saying here is the way that my like work as a journalist gets before the eyes of readers, like at one point, maybe in the not too distant future, it was, people would actually, they had bookmarks, cnet.com or forbes.com, and they would actually just go see, or even like my personal page on those places. Like at one point, people were actually, checking their RSS reader or their bookmark pages and just like going direct to the source. And I think that happens like not at all anymore. And it's all driven through SEO or through social. And like none of us have, and when I say us, I mean journalists and journalism people, none of us have any fucking clue how that works and just when like the SEO people think they've kind of got it worked out, like Google will like flip a switch on the algorithm or tweak something in the algorithm and just everything goes haywire and you're like starting all over again. And I don't know, I think there's probably a better way to do that. And it gives just an awful lot of power to a few centralized entities. And I think Mike earlier was gesturing towards some of the problems with that, I think. Because I mean, it's not like there's an editorial board like behind that chimes in on the tweaks to the Google algorithm. At least I don't think so. I don't know any journalists that are on that editorial board that exists. So proposed solution, a decentralized protocol for news content, which I think is maybe kind of like Crystal, when you're talking about like the information being like the base layer that's a public good. I kind of think that's kind of where my mind is with this. A Google News without Google News, a decentralized publishing system or a decentralized system of metadata for news stories. So in other words, I guess what I'm picturing is this like base layer of the actual information, the reporting could be on a blockchain. It could be that the reporting is actually on the blockchain, or it could be that it's on like IPFS, or it's not actually on a chain, but you've got the metadata perhaps on a chain that's pointing to it, and then that metadata can be accessed for reasons of discoverability. In other words, you're like kind of reverse engineering the Google algorithm, but making it open and making it transparent, and making it composable. And so, yeah, you could have, and under the advantages, the metadata could include universal tags for fields, including geolocation, the sources that are in a story, the version history, corrections, topics, keywords. So just kind of all the important parts of reporting, making that more transparent than it traditionally has been, as a means of building up more trust than we have now with readers, I think. And then also using that metadata for discoverability in a more transparent way than through the centralized services. A publishing system with content stored on a decentralized system provides unprecedented levels of transparency and immutability to increase public trust in the reporting process. I already wrote it down. Some of the challenges is that some of this metadata might not be appropriate to be on a public blockchain. If you're dealing with anonymous sources, or there could be temporal problems, like, okay, we want to put this information on, but it can't, things are embargoed, or that kind of stuff. So, and some of this I don't know that we've actually talked about, because I don't know that I've really expressed this as like a physical thing that I kind of envision being built, and how we could use that metadata. So any thoughts there? Does it make any sense?
I like it. Yeah, it makes sense to me. I think, and so just referencing what I was talking about earlier, it's kind of like now we have people who are doing the work of Google News and curation just by interacting with things, right? And like they kind of expose their preferences to Google, and then it like does perform its algorithm based on interactions, and it spits out stuff that it thinks you'll like based on everything it knows about you and the things that people are doing on the actual content. And so if we take Google News out of that, I imagine the people who appreciate having like a curated feed of stuff that's relevant to them, that they enjoy, and whatever they're willing to pay for that should go back to like the people who are like
designing those algorithms, maybe designing the open source algorithms. Is that what you're saying?
Before it even gets to the algorithm, or like I'm talking about like the person who like read this on their phone and allowed that to be tracked by the algorithm as a signal that like that piece of content that's like labor, right? Like attention as labor, which we're kind of understanding is like the source of Google's billions of dollars or whatever. So I think ideally, if you take that out, then instead of like people just doing this because they want the end result, which is like a better news feed or whatever, and like that exchange is like very roundabout. It's really like, oh yeah, me reading this and just interacting with it is useful to people to know. And so the way that it gets monetized on the other end should come back to the person who like contributed to that, so it's like if I'm willing to pay $10 a month for like a really awesome news feed that is based on other people's reading habits, but I don't get to see those reading habits, basically. I still want like the people, and I would be included in that, right? Like I'm part of it too. I'm paying for and getting paid by this usage, right? Like I'm paying for the thing that's valuable to me, and the people who are the substrate for generating that value are also getting rewarded. And since we've taken out like the extractive mediary, like those amounts actually become interesting and significant.
So you're talking about kind of bringing in the Republic thesis of data ownership, data sovereignty, right?
Yeah, I mean, now it's like a technical implementation of the idea. I'm just saying, like, I don't think you can have the algorithm without, you can't have a fair algorithm without that being the case, perhaps, or else you're going to end up with some version of Google News, right? Where like, okay, I developed this algorithm, that's the value that I'm providing. You like having the news feed that's based off of it, and so you're going to pay me. But then how am I developing that? Like, what's that algorithm working on? It's working on user data.
Yeah.
Right. Is this making sense? I don't know.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
I don't know if it's worth articulating here, but I think like it's something that's useful to like that as a model to keep in mind, like as we fit a news protocol into this, that there is this sort of like inherent value extraction that's happening now, that us removing these extractors kind of puts us in a place to either do something about this or not, but it's not like a passive decision.
Right. So it's like if we're at the point where like we've already it's become an industry already to quantify attention, right? Like you're saying. And so if the idea is to bring the audience, back into the cycle of value, then like it's kind of having a discussion about okay, we're already quantifying your attention, so let's figure out let's be transparent about that, and about how what, if any, value is being placed on that, and how we're all going to share in that, as content consumers and producers.
Mm-hmm. So like from just like a user experience side, it could be like, oh, do you want to download this app that uses this algorithm? Like, yeah, that sounds interesting. Like the thing that people are like talking about the most, or just like spending the longest amount of time on, like I want my feed sorted by those metrics. And then you'd be presented with, do you want to share your own reading metrics or your own sharing metrics, like for a portion of like the next sale or whatever? So it's like, I pay $10 for this app. This app is a productization of this algorithm that like feeds off of these interaction types, and then like the app distributes that, my feed proportionately out to people, and then I can opt in to be one of those people who also gets that fee for sharing my interactions, like that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, makes sense to me.
Yeah, makes sense to me too. I like it. And I think too, now that all these journalists are moving over to Mastodon, we're actually right now going through this same process without the monetization aspect, where we're recrafting the feeds that we're consuming and being very deliberate in what I'm allowing to come back in. And I've actually started using multiple accounts for that. So I think that we won't have to dive so deep into the conversation about, curating your own feeds at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Let's see, I'll move on to the next one. Some of these should be a little quicker. formal fact check. I'm on number 3 here. Formal fact checking journalism is going extinct. And what I'm referring to here is like the fact that there actually used to be people where there was actually a person on staff that like that's all they did was go through a story and like call up the sources and make sure that they really said this, or go and double check the data. And like there's copy editors now that will like do a little bit of this and like kind of click through the link and make sure that what you're citing is actually there. And but like it is something that has like really kind of fallen by the wayside. So like Web3 obviously provides some interesting opportunities to bring that back. And we talked previously before about the idea of maybe even building a way to do on-chain attestations. So like, there's actually like, there is somebody at the New Yorker still that will like call up every source and say like, is this what you meant by this? We're quoting you as this, is that accurate? You said you were fired from Twitter in September 2022. Is that correct? So I mean, we could be putting all this on chain and actually doing a much better job than outlets do right now by having that process. I mean, something could be built where like your source logs into some sort of something online, and they're like, here's what we're putting in the story. Do you attest that this is the truth? Are we quoting you correctly here? Are these the actual facts? And they would click yes, and that would actually sign a transaction on the blockchain or whatever. And then all of that can be publicly viewable for a reader, which is like something you never see. And I think that would be pretty interesting. That one's pretty straightforward. And just kind of the basic idea there being to increase transparency as much as possible. And this is one of these tools that like blockchain provides that has nothing to do with the like financial aspects of crypto. This is literally just we've got public and immutable databases available now. Like we can use them for journalism. Any comments on that one?
I just wanted to say I really like this idea. I have kind of a vested interest in liking this idea because the market might be an experiment grounds for that. But generally, I just think the direction could be a really high ROI, direction to experiment in, because having attestations kind of does two things that isn't currently done. One, it makes transparent and explicit the fact that ultimately we are attesting to something. Ultimately, we are putting our judgment on the line and saying, I'm certain enough about this to say that it's true, and you should trust me. There is kind of a fundamental subjective judgment that happens to say, all right, this is a fact. I am stamping this as true enough that you don't have to check it for me. Second, the attestations keep a record of these so that the people who do a better job will eventually be more trusted than the people who do a worse job. Mm-hmm. It becomes, we kind of iterate toward the people who are good judges of the facts as decided, by history or hindsight or whatever. And then, those people can help, attest to facts that can be reused. We can say, oh, hey, these people whom you all trust already said this, and then you can just pull it right from there. So I just think it's a very efficient and well-modeled way of solving this problem. Just thinking along the same lines, and I think there are a lot of benefits and efficiencies to that aren't there right now.
Yeah, and it's like right now, kind of the closest thing we have is, Google has like they establish reputation somehow, but it's like behind closed doors. So it kind of destroys the purpose in a way. And that's, it becomes a corrupting force rather than serving its own purpose. I didn't see that what you put here, Crystal, and this Crystal puts, I think we can also add the fact checking necessary to ensure that news articles aren't actually being produced by AI like Chat GPT, fact checking, right. And and this is also something that like, it's a big technical lift, but you know, if we had robust decentralized file storage systems where we talked about this a little bit with like the content authenticity initiative and what they're working on. You know, if it became kind of standard practice that news organizations, they post all of their photos and video footage that gets published is also, you know, published somewhere on a blockchain or some decentralized storage system that's accessible and immutable, like that becomes a very powerful tool for fighting against censorship, deep fakes, and then like AI fuckery, like all kinds of stuff like that. And it's kind of like in the same category in my mind. So let's see, problem number 4. These start to get a little bit more cheeky, I think. Everyone in Web3 is a scammer or a marketer trying to game the system. So how do we like kind of clean up our own mess? And so this gets to something that this gets us to the Journo token and also to the kind of things that I think Mike is working on, which is you know, having some sort of mechanism to establish reputation and credibility over time. So maybe I will just kind of turn it over to Keith if you want to talk about where your mind is at on, you know, how the Journo token might play a role in that.
Yeah, first, is this like a kind of internal facing problem? Like this seems like a problem for JournoDAO as we try and like explain things to like people who are not in Web3 or like
yeah, I guess I'm kind of conflating two things here in a way, because it's there's reputation issues because of Web3 and crypto, and then there's also reputation issues just in general in journalism and media, and I'm kind of smashing those together, I guess, because I don't know, I think if you know, we're able to use a token as a measure of credibility and show that it can be used that way, well, it demonstrates credibility both for those journalists and also, you know, just shows that you can, you know, build something useful with Web3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think as long as we frame it as like this is like one of, or like an instance of a certain type of thing that we're hoping to like see more of as like a good example of, you know, what can be done for value transfer that's not like a scam or speculative, or at least it's like follows a model that people are familiar with, like just like donating to like nonprofits or groups that they like the work that they do. And so I think the Journo token is something we're hoping to launch soon, and it's like a non-transferable token that you can basically make a donation to JournoDAO, and then we will mint and distribute Journo token to a journalist of your choosing for a piece of content of your choosing. And then that kind of, instead of like a small tip or something to a journalist that might not make that much of an impact, we can kind of pull a bunch of resources from that energy and then funnel those back into public goods and resources for journalists. At least that's the theory, and we're excited to try it out. And then I think what can be built on, like, what does the Journo token balance represent in somebody's wallet? Like our first just kind of proof of concept idea is to have a leaderboard of just like who are the top token holders, and then if you're at the top, then like any attention brought to the Journo token and this leaderboard will then like you can promote a piece of content or whatever you want in like your leaderboard spot. So it's like, oh, I like this journalist, I'm going to give them like $2 in Journo, and that's going to like edge them up the leaderboard. They'll get more attention, and hopefully there's like a, you know, a virtuous cycle there. What as far as like the framing it into this solution, Eric, what did you have in mind? Do you think it's self-explanatory, or should be like, I kind of view it as like a an API that others could build on, like, you know, somebody could build an inverse of this where like the more Journo token you have, like the worse you are and everyone hates on you or whatever. Like it's just once it's out there, it, like anything can be built on it. For us, you know, it's a signal of this, and we're just kind of curious whether the donation to JournoDAO would mitigate some of those other things. It's like, oh, well, whatever you fight about as far as Journo token goes, like your funds are going to JournoDAO, and that's going to produce public goods for journalism. So
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly how the mechanics are going to work out, but I guess, you know, it's an experiment to me, and an experiment in, you know, kind of like Backland. It's like you're putting your money where your mouth is, and you're saying like, you know, this is, I actually purchased this, and well, it's tipping basically, right? Like I'm willing to tip this journalist, and you know, just to see if that moves the needle in terms of you know, incentivizing, both like incentivizing, you know, certain kinds of work, and also does the Journo token flow in the way that we think it will, you know, in terms of actually establishing like reputation for quality, or you know, whatever attributes are attached to it. So yeah, I don't know. I just see it like as an experiment with incentives that we'll be able to play with. Is that kind of where you're at?
yeah, it's like a signal that we are kind of we're starting with our view of what that signal means, but then its community, its openness allows it to like take on a life of its own, for better, for worse. And I think that's kind of something that we can point to people outside the space, as like a token that's doing something other than you know, pumping and dumping on people, and that actually is like relevant to them. Like, because for me, like Web3 and blockchain stuff never really made any sense until like I was forced to like set up a wallet, and then I got stuff that like I owned in my wallet, and I'm like, oh, this is different than just like spectating from the outside, and like now I have something. And so it's like, oh, we'll send you some Journo token, and like, oh yeah, what's Journo token? So I think it's just a tool to you know, hopefully fundraise, but if not, at least like send each other Journo tokens. Like, I think it'll be fun, but we'll see.
I'm excited what we could do with it as the ecosystem evolves, because those things will already be in place and they're soul bound and they're not attached to monetization. So I'm really excited to see, you know, what we could play with too. And I got to run, I got to go to class. So.
All right,
Thanks,
good to see
Crystal.
you, Kristen.
Bye.
Nick, did you have something? You had your hand raised.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to throw a wrench into that. The thing about the Journo token. So I had this thought that there's kind of a big like the incentive models that are built in cryptocurrency or in other types of group-based thinking. There's always kind of a commitment scheme aspect where you start with like a, you know, an upfront cost to the person that's using the thing to kind of invest them in using the thing, right? Or as a way to bond people together. Like sometimes this is I always come back to the example of Kusama on Polkadot where they actually have the Kusama Council, and they have this idea of getting a tattoo so that you can like get a tattoo of the Kusama bird on your body, and then they'll pay you money out of a lottery. Somebody in the like, it's a way of using game theory, cult tactics, and public goods concepts to like make this really weird, interesting model. That I think that's a really interesting idea. It's a bit extreme, but like it really, everything about it makes sense to me. So I've been spending a lot of time looking at how cult dynamics are parallel to what people do in digital marketing, because the same kind of like mind control techniques are widely used by Google and social media. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Well, so how are you viewing that in terms of, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And how do you see it relate to Journo token?
And where's your tattoo? You have like,
Yeah.
you've got the little J tattoo somewhere, right?
I'd have like 1,000 on my body if I get away with it. No, but I did seriously look at the possibility, because they're paying each person in this lottery $3,000 a month, but they couldn't spend the money. They couldn't take the money out and keep it. They had to spend it on community proposals. So there's like a whole, they're basically delaying the corruption that's inevitably going to follow. But the idea is interesting, right? It's that like you can't keep the money, it has to go towards other, you're basically now a grant provider on your own community. So, and there's a way to kind of keep you long-term committed in theory, but you know, lots of people get Snoopy tattoos, so who cares? But that's the concept. So in terms of how it applies to JournoDAO or any journalism concept, like I think the idea is that in journalism, you're staking your professional reputation as the thing that is kind of up for sacrifice if you make ethical missteps or lapses in judgment, whatever the thing is. So you need a way to commit people. Everybody's committed, I think, to the idea of like truth and justice in journalism. But you need a way to commit people to the community that you're trying to contrive, right? So that's I think a missing piece, because everyone here is just doing this from like a pure idealistic perspective and not trying to manipulate people into jumping into something and then making them all feel happy and committed and culty. But sometimes I'm trying to accept that like that's a part of how community growth works, because people are kind of like ants. So that's just kind of a function of how to group them together and get them to follow into this thing.
It's an interesting, so there's feels to me like there's a pretty interesting catch-22 here, but maybe there's a way around it. And the catch-22 is, like you said, we're all kind of here out of like some idealistic, mission-driven notion, and we've just kind of been functioning so far like, okay, the community is just going to rally around, being mission-driven, and that's worked for several months now. And the catch-22 is, it seems like introducing, some, whether it's a token or, tattoo, or, this like upfront, commitment bonding that you're describing, Nick. It feels like that you do that like at risk of actually corrupting the mission of being mission driven. But I'm not sure I totally believe that. Like I don't know, because I haven't thought about it enough. Like maybe they aren't, maybe it isn't totally mutually exclusive. Mike, you had your hand up, and I think this is all this topic is probably also in your wheelhouse, right?
Let's it's a glancing blow to my wheelhouse. My wheelhouse might have something to say about it. Yeah, we at Idea Market did an experiment a couple of weeks ago where we took one of the posts that had a lot of ratings or attestations on it. And since the posts and the attestations are on chain, we were able to filter wallet data based on their opinions as registered on chain. So an on-chain attestation allows filtering by on-chain attributes. And what this means we could experiment with is filter opinions by journo token holders, so that instead of seeing, for each fact or each post, instead of seeing the general public opinion, we could create an API that allows you to see what's the collective opinion of those who have journo token in their wallets. And you could become a kind of de facto curator in that way, and kind of see, you decide for yourselves who deserves to be involved and who should be contributing. And there's an extra potential, benefit here if it works, if it's interesting, is that if JournoDAO originates a post, like if it makes posts from a DAO owned wallet, then when anybody rates that post, that wallet will have income that it's able to withdraw in proportion to the amount of ratings that it attracts. So there could even be a value case for the Journo token if it becomes a frequent occurrence that, hey, when JournoDAO posts something, a lot of ratings flow in, a lot of income flows in, and then you could use that to purchase back Journo token or distribute it to token holders in proportion to their holdings or something like that. So those two kind of use cases might combine, or might be an interesting thing to play with. And that's all doable now with the product that's live now. There are some front end things that would have to be built for the filtering by token holder aspect, but in theory, it's all live. It's all doable right now.
I love that. That's awesome. That's what's exciting about this, is like once you put it out there and then it's open, like people could build stuff on it that we don't even know about or sanction or anything. They can just like run with it. And yeah, I'd love to pursue those things too. We'll keep in touch as we put it live. Yeah.
So we're about at the time that we normally stop. Where is everyone at in terms of time? I had a few more here, but we've covered a lot, and there's probably some overlap as well. So let's see, any pressing things we want to be sure to get in? Do people have a few more minutes where we take a quick poll?
I can go over if everyone's having a good time. I enjoy this stuff, but I know it can be pretty long for other people.
Yeah, I'm good to keep going. I'm just eating right now.
Okay, I'll just kind of maybe roll through the last couple here, and people can obviously come and go as they need to. So the last two, number 5, local news outlets are dying, and Web2 social media platforms are filling the void with gossip, fake news, and other kinds of crap. And this is this is particularly relevant, and I've given the example a few times to some people here, are probably sick of me talking about, which is I'm in New Mexico, where there were a lot of wildfires down the road.
Oh
this
God!
summer. And this, I just ended up writing something about this yet again, so it's on the top of my mind. But so these the communities that were actually most affected are like the definition of a news desert. There's just this isolated mountain valley with like no newspaper, no news resources or anything, and so like the information that was like getting into the valley and coming out of the valley about the wildfires was like kind of a disaster. It was a lot of bad information, a lot of like just people playing telephone about where what evacuation shelters to go to, where the fire was, like whose property was safe and whose wasn't. It was really a mess. And then the phones went out and it got even worse. So and it's just this kind of prime example of like why you actually need local journalists, and why like Mark Zuckerberg's fantasy of connecting everybody into little Facebook groups like is not an adequate substitute. And so kind of the master design then is the master solution is to capture the energy that is basically the attention and energy that people are pouring into those Web 2 platforms right now, and diverting it into Web 3, where kind of like we were talking about earlier, Keith, we can return the value to the creators and the communities, and just instead of just having it extracted by the platforms and their algorithms. So the this is definitely more of a macro thing, and like there's not one specific tool I think to solve this, but this is more like if we get all these tools built and they're all up and running perfectly, then we can maybe begin to address these kind of like grand society level problems like this.
Did you write these all at once? So I feel like by number 5 you're getting a little sassy and fix life and save democracy. Pros.
I wrote the first 5 all at once, and and I probably wrote them in reverse order because they get more grandiose as I'm getting more sassy.
I want to see a yada 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 in there.
Yeah. And then that's why I had to go up to the top and call it a rough draft. Add that in there. So the final one, well, not the final one, but the most recent one that I added just kind of recently after listening to an audiobook that I was listening to about like the history of journalism or something. And it just kind of had me thinking about how the current business model for journalism is adversarial and based on competition between outlets, which leads to a misalignment in business incentives, which is like, this goes into the first one, that the incentives are that you got to be first, and you have to guard and hoard your sources and resources as a journalist, rather than collaborating with other journalists. It's kind of funny. It's like the opposite of what happens in science, which has kind of the same stated goals as a journalist to get to the truth, to get to what's really going on. But because science is supported by a more public, by academia and by more public funding, there's like a lot of infrastructure for collaboration is built in, where it's the exact opposite in most of journalism, where you're just trying to destroy your enemy or to be fast. I mean, your competition be faster than them more than anything else, which again, not great for getting to the truth. Not good for the stated goals and ethics of journalism, and which are to observe and explain the universe as completely and fairly as possible. So, this is another one of these like kind of macro level problems that if all the tools get up and running, maybe they'll be able to address this. But the proposed solution, build a model that is more collaborative among news outlets and journalists than competitive, and it focuses on creating, retaining, and regenerating shared value for a broad ecosystem and community. So like the potential tool, I guess, for this solution is like DAOs themselves. And just the broader composable and collaborative Web3 ethos. And that's all I got.
This doesn't really pertain to the point, but I'd say that if you read Code Breaker by Walter Isaacson, I was not left feeling that the science world was less adversarial and rushing to be first than journalists.
I mean, I know what you mean. Like there's like that system's not perfect either, right? But it's like you know, like I cover like a lot of astronomy stuff, and it's like if an astronomer sees like, oh, there's a crazy meteor headed this way, like the first thing that happens is there's like both like automated alerts, and there's, you know, just like email chains that will go around the world, like anytime, day or night, instantaneously. The telescopes, like, you know, Hubble's suddenly pointing at this galaxy, and, you know, like all these astronomers around the world will collaborate to verify what this guy over here saw, or to you know, get more data on it, and then they all publish a paper, and there's like 100 authors on the co-authors on the paper, and that never happens in journalism. Like maybe like there's a few examples like the Panama Papers or something like that, where you know, but it's like this Herculean feat of like funding and coordinating journalists, and there, I mean, more of it is happening now probably than ever before, that kind of collaborative stuff, but like it's not anywhere near standard practice. But yeah, there's fucked up shit in science too, like particularly when it comes to like publishing.
But yeah, I think it's a really good point. I think the framing of, you know, moving from adversarial to cooperative, I mean, there are certain types of information that might benefit like from being adversarial, but like they don't need to be adversarial in the same way of like, you are my enemy, but just like okay, we're both trying to get here first, and like there's like a relatively like incentivized reason to do that, but like there's not an incentive to like cut your throat so that you don't get there first or something, like and that the meteor one's kind of interesting because I'd imagine some of that stems from just like mutually assured destruction. Like I think everyone benefits if everyone else is letting everyone else know if there's like an anomaly, like just from national security standpoints, and I don't know, threat detection and all that stuff makes it a little bit easier to like collaborate because you want the person across the globe to do the same thing for you. So it's like reciprocal.
Yeah, I guess I'm interested in like Web3 seems like, and DAO seems like a great way to actually set up some of that infrastructure. Because there's also just like not a lot of infrastructure for journalists to collaborate, where like there is in the scientific community. Like these things have actually been built, like there's actual systems, and we don't really have that. And but this is like, I don't know, it's like tailor-made to build something like that, it seems like.
Seems like the credentialing would play a big part, because I think, I don't know if there's an official name for it, but there's this kind of like wall that goes up while you're news gathering, you know, and that you don't necessarily want to like share everything, whether it gets back to sources, whether you just want to make sure that you have it right before you go and like, you know, raise an alarm about something. And so to collaborate on that, like on the internal side, like you have to be kind of careful about who you bring into like that information gathering before it's really like ready for
Yeah, sure.
consumption.
I mean,
So,
particularly if you're doing like investigative stuff where you don't want to tip off people you're investigating to shred their documents or some shit like that. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's definitely case by case.
but I'm saying like this is a way that Web3 can help, because you can, you know, have faith in this credentialing.
Oh yeah.
Where like if somebody random like emails you and wants to like collaborate on your news gathering for some investigative piece or whatever, you'll be like, no. But this sets up the potential for like a, you know, a unknown person to verify trust and then actually like collaborate on like a sensitive news story, where before that would be impossible.
It's kind of funny. Like I had lunch yesterday with a friend who's also a journalist, and he had written a story. It was about like homelessness in Albuquerque, and he's like, and he like pulled up an email and it was this email, and it was like from like the news outlets, contact form, and it was from like it was like daisyflower@yahoo.com, and then like just like in all caps it was like please call me now, important information about your story on homelessness. And he was like should I respond to this person? And because it's like you're saying, it's like this total like it almost, I mean, it like almost it almost looked like you would think it was a bot. There were actually a couple of tells about like the phone number and the email where I'm like, actually, I think this is legit. I might actually know who this person is, but so like, but he was of the mind. He's like, yeah, this is like, I can't verify this. Like, I'm not sure this is worth my time. I'm thinking of just ignoring it. I was like, well, I wouldn't. I mean, just out of like curiosity, I'm like, you never know what is going to be a lead. But yeah, I think it's interesting that we have like different instincts about that, and it kind of gets to what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's all I had for today. And Chris, we had talked about maybe beginning to like plot out a roadmap for next year. And Crystal and I are started to put that together a little bit on Notion, but like presumably, so where we're at is applying for some grants to help fund experiments to address some of these things outlined here, and other stuff that we've discussed in the past. And so yeah, that's about all I got. I probably gotta log off, but thank you everybody for making the time, and it's always fun and fascinating to dig into all this stuff. Any final thoughts, Keith, or anybody else?
Well, maybe this can be a separate thing, but I was curious what you thought of my comment there, just like not reducing, but like enumerating parts of the protocol is that like at the top.
Okay. Oh yeah.
It's like a set of features that like the protocol should provide, like permanent immutable storage, publicly audible news gathering and editing. So it's just like a different way of framing this. Like you have like the problem and the solution, pros and cons. But this might be like more like a spec list of like the protocol must do this and must do that sort of thing.
Yeah, so it's like this is what we're building, and yeah, written like a person who actually understands the meaning of the word protocol.
It's a journey. I felt like this was something I could add, and that's not like an exhaustive. I think those were just like as I was going down, kind of like repackaging stuff. And some people might, it'll make more sense to have the problem and solution, and then other people might just want to see like a bullet list of stuff that the protocol does or whatever.
Yeah, I feel like maybe we're working towards like that bulleted list. Like because like as I'm reading over what you wrote, like everything seems right. Like what's in the back of my mind is like, I wonder if this is fully comprehensive. Like, I'm just wondering if there's anything left out or anything that we might.
I don't think I included the adversarial thing, and that'd be interesting to.
Right, I actually added that, I think, later.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to try and like condense down into like what the protocol like actually needs to fulfill there.
I would also recommend approaching it from the other direction. Not only what needs to be added, but what can be taken away.
Mm-hmm.
What are the crucial aspects? when I was a baseball player as a teenager when my hair was short, and I was a pitcher. And, when I was younger, especially, I wanted to imitate the professionals who I thought were really cool. And a lot of them had some kind of quirky behavior or weird delivery or something like that. And my dad, would prevent me from doing that because he wanted me to learn and keep it simple. Because the more elements there are, the more opportunities there are to mess things up.
Mhm.
This has kind of continued to ring in my head. And especially in, entrepreneur, startup, product world, where getting users to use a thing, to understand a thing, to adopt a thing is already difficult. The more sort of primitive a thing is, the fewer problems there are between building and adoption. And this is something that Idea Market has suffered from a lot, because I'm a philosophy nerd who is inclined toward complication and comprehensiveness. And, many times we've launched things that I wish had been simpler in retrospect. Oh, maybe we should have just taken the first grain of this and made it feel like Tinder or something like that. So like these incredibly simple things. So to whatever extent there is a paring down or at least discovery of a tip of a spear that could be useful for like the onboarding part of it, I just want to recommend that there could be a lot of value in that conversation and how much narrowing, how much subtraction can be done.
Yeah, I guess I think of this, like document as like kind of a mostly like internal thing of like, okay, this is like the manifesto, right? And like this is like everything, these are the problems that we see and the things that we think we can do something about. But yes, I would hope that this document is never like public facing because it's going to, yeah.
And I didn't mean that in any kind of critical way at all. Just, for the convergence, for the conversation.
I think you're totally right. And that's like what, like in the beginning where I was like, I hope we don't call this news protocol because it's like it's a terrible like public.
It's memorable.
Yeah, I mean it's memorable for us because like we know, like if you're like in Web3, like it kind of makes sense. But like if I were to call my mom up and be like, we're releasing news protocol, she'd be like, well, okay, I'm back to Matlock. So, but yeah, I hear you. And for like something, public facing down the road, or like a product, like I would at this point I kind of hope it makes like zero mention of Web3, but we'll see.
I suspect your version to that might end up being like an aversion to like calling something a web page, like back in like the early 2000s or something. Like I think protocol is probably gonna, I don't know, make its way into
Maybe,
maybe not, I don't know. We'll see. Well, thanks for putting this together. This is awesome, and it definitely gets us farther. I think part of the value we are generating here is just sifting through all this complexity and all these ideas, and pulling out the salient stuff, and just for other people who join on, there's more like tractable, like this is what we're doing and this is how we're going to do it sort of thing. So
for sure, yeah. Thanks for taking the time, and I would like to figure out a time to learn a little bit more about Idea Market too, Mike.
Yeah, happy to do that anytime. And we can do that as a JournoDAO event, or I can just share my Calendly link in your Discord and you can book time generously and we can jam on it.
Okay, sounds good. I think either of those might work. All right. I have got to run. So thanks all, and I'll see you next week, if not sooner.
all right, bye.